One.
Hello, Ranjan. It's great to see you, and thanks a lot for coming aboard Save British Farming to talk about farming and food and probably Brexit, no doubt.
Great to be with you again, Liz. Can you tell me about this story that I sent you? I've not fully read it. I know about some of the background. There's a story on The Guardian today saying that the first labels of food that is not destined for the EU are now being sold in Northern Ireland. So basically, food is being sold in Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK, and it's got labels on it that says that that food is not to go to the European Union. I've got some questions about that, such as, is this the future for all food or just dairy? Or I've got no idea if there's a limit, if there's some sort of a perimeter on that. And what it all means, really. I mean, I've got some idea, but can you tell me what you think?
Well, because the decision by, I'm going to do this for you, because of the decision of this guy, when he got Brexit done, he decided that we should have the most extreme Brexit, and so that we can diverge from EU rules. And when we were in the EU single market, there were many advantages to us as farmers and as consumers because of the protections of that market. We've all traveled to, well, not we all, but I have, and I'm sure you have traveled to countries that haven't got high food standards. And we all know what it's like to come home and not think, oh my goodness, where am I eating, and is it going to be okay, and am I going to die from eating a lettuce leaf and getting some form of botulism? And ultimately, that's what it means. It means deregulation, so that different standards can start to come into Britain through trading with other people in the world. And that's why we have to have a hard border between us and the EU. And because of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, there had to be a border somewhere, and we couldn't have a border between Northern Ireland and the other part of Ireland because of the many historical issues around that. So they decided to put this border in the sea, which means that certain goods which need to be inspected by a vet or whatever to go to the European Union, which can go to the Northern Ireland because they're still part of the UK, they are now, the compromise is that those foods are going to have a sticker on there which say that it's only to be eaten in Northern Ireland and not sent through to the EU. So to me, it really feels like a downgrade, and it feels like I don't know, like you've been sort of labelled as in not good enough for the European Union. And I don't see anything to celebrate in this label coming through. And certainly I know for food producers, it's more admin that they don't need.
So does that mean that the food that's being labelled now and in the future will be necessarily British food? Or is it also food that somehow gets to Britain? Then is that what the label is for? Because if it's coming from, say, America and then comes to England, then goes to Northern Ireland, or possibly even comes from America straight to Northern Ireland, then afterwards, that would mean that it was not supposed to go to the EU. I'm guessing it would get to Ireland anyway. I mean, the Republic of Ireland anyway, because that doesn't sound very hard. But I'm assuming it's to stop it from going to France and Holland and Germany and stuff like that.
I mean, at the moment, I don't know if you've seen footage that, some lorry drivers or even families traveling to Europe, if they're inspected and they've got a ham sandwich, go to Europe, it's confiscated. But I suppose the risk to the single market is about quantity. and big shipments of food, and about food fraud, which is huge business. And yeah, it is a real problem going forward with Brexit. And it is one of the reasons why I think that if Britain saw sense again and decided that Brexit was a disaster, that the European Union may be more open to negotiating with us to get us back in the single market because of this problem with Northern Ireland. The other alternative, of course, is that the island reunifies, and then we have a proper hard border between us and Ireland, which is a possibility. But that means, as we know, more problems, and that's why the DUP are kicking off now about Brexit, even though they wanted Brexit, even though it delivered this absolute nightmare. It's Brexit isn't done, and Brexit will never be done, and it is significantly a problem for food and human health and the environment.
So does that mean that this label is, in a sense, indicative of a little bit of a hardening of some sort of a border between Northern Ireland and Ireland? I mean, and the rest of Ireland. Maybe I've got that completely wrong, or maybe the Republic of Ireland are actually going to be very strict about the way they enforce this for the labels of the food.
Well, no, there isn't a border between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. So the whole point is making sure that the border between GB and Northern Ireland is sufficiently managed to stop quantities of lower standard foods going into the single market. And this is the compromise that they've reached, but it's not straightforward. It's highly complex. It's fraught with problems. As I said, the only real way of settling it in the long run is either for Britain to join the Single Market and Customs Union, which I think is by far the simplest thing to do, because it means that there's harmonisation. But the problem we've got is that those that sold Brexit, just to remind you, want to diverge. And diverging means lower standards. And none of us can understand the advantages of divergence unless you want to level down to countries that have lower standards and lower workers' rights and food standards, animal welfare standards. But of course, it's very infuriating because people that voted for Brexit were told that they wouldn't lower standards and were told that food was going to be cheaper and all of these different things that they were told. They didn't communicate the trade-offs of Brexit. So this is where we are. And to try and deflect away from this, there's just minimal detail on the BBC and so forth, as in, oh yeah, there's suddenly this great new Brexit label we've got for Northern Ireland only, not to the EU. And so, yes, it certainly doesn't feel like progress to me. I guess when the single market opened up, it was so seamless, wasn't it? That I don't know if you remember it. I certainly do. Suddenly, the traveling became so much easier. But I don't suppose it was ever properly communicated with us why it was easier to send things back and forth to Europe once the single market opened up. And we are where we are.
When it comes to food security, I know this is something that you look at. What's going on with that? And that's obviously covering different angles, not just Brexit, but what's happening with food security? Because this is something that I know has concerned you for some time. Can this country feed itself?
No, I mean, this country hasn't been able to feed itself for hundreds of years. We have relied on imports for a long time. And it makes sense that you don't just, especially a small country like ours, especially with a difficult climate, that your food security should be underpinned by some imports from another area. And that's why the single market was so good, because we had, a large continent just bang on our doorstep here to fall back on. And so the food security that we had, or food security, is about making sure you've got enough food Some of it will be home produced, and some of it is then via a trade agreement, which we had with the EU, which was free of friction to come in. So in essence, the United Kingdom is a union, the same as the European Union. And we have a single market really within the UK now, especially since devolution. So it is, imagine if you had a border. I mean, we did sort of have a border with Wales, but now we don't have to pay to go across to Wales any longer. But imagine if we did have a border between us and Wales and England and Scotland, and that everything had to be checked. How much more difficult that will be. And so these are the problems in varying standards. So when we went, which was Margaret Thatcher's idea, supposedly, or she was at the helm of it, to create a single market where we harmonise standards, so that it's a big market, it's powerful in trade deals, it can make demands of smaller countries to get preferential terms, and it means that we don't have to waste time with checking items going on and off lorries and boats and planes and so forth. So from that perspective, Brexit is a very backward step for food, for the environment, for animal welfare, and for public health.
You sound almost calm compared to how I have remembered some of our conversations on this subject. Have you completely resigned yourself to, I mean, I know you say maybe we'll join the single market again, but from a food security perspective, is there any way back? Because there's the whole issue to do with the fertilizer prices as well, isn't there?
The government have, they chose not to keep our fertilizer plants open. And the problem is a lot of people are not even aware of the fact that we need fertilizers to grow food. If you remove fertilizer, then you can your yields basically more than halve. And with the way that prices are going and the imports that we're facing, if we in Britain got rid of fertilizer, it really wouldn't be worth us growing anything. So they closed the plants because they couldn't afford to keep them open after all of the energy crisis. And they asked for a loan, actually, from the government, and they refused to give it to them. I think it was 10 million from memory. And everyone goes on about wanting sovereignty with Brexit. To me, food is sovereignty. I know food is important to you, Ranjan. You know, I find it extraordinary that people are sort of like, oh, yeah, you know, I feel really great because I got my sovereignty back. Okay. Well, how do you feel sovereign if you can't guarantee that you're going to have enough food to eat? So for me, the food security issue is massive. But we've become complacent. We've had such amazing food since we joined the European Union, and variety has only got better and standards have only gone up. And people don't seem to be aware of, or they seem to have forgotten what life was like back in the 60s. Or I remember what it was like back in the 60s and the 70s, and what food was like then compared to what we've had. And we're going back to those sort of times, but potentially worse, because in those days, at least, A, we had a smaller population, B, we had a different food system in Britain. We had much shorter supply chains, and the system was less centralized. Whereas now it's accommodated or adjusted to a large system with the European Union. So it's almost like deciding Brexit for the food system is like deciding to rip out your heart and put in or hope that a replacement is going to come along somehow, but you don't know what that replacement is. And it means that essentially the food production here in this part of the world is really under a lot of stress, and food production is contracting.